A quick disclaimer before we begin this episode. There are a couple scene transitions during this chapter, which will likely be indicated by some sort of fade effect or something like that, something similar probably if a fade isn't distinguishable enough. I won't know that until I actually start editing the video. But just a heads up that there will be some sort of effect to indicate that, because the setting of the fourth chapter jumps around between a couple different locations. With that, let's dive into the final episode of this journey. Chapter 4. So she just snuck out? Asked James's male guest, seated at the table in the calm aftermath of the elderly host's uncharacteristic panic. Bassy vocals complemented his tall, stalwart physique. Frizzy, shoulder-length brown hair and a shaggy, thick beard collectively misrepresented the handsome face hidden within, as did filth covering his tanned skin and huntsman attire. Leaning against the back of his chair was a 25-inch crossbow and a leather quiver carrying approximately 30 quarrels. The companion he arrived alongside was busy scouting outside for Kylene's destination. Unfortunately so, James reiterated heavily, preparing a ceramic pitcher of juice by straining assorted fruits. Seeking Kylene to perform the task had confirmed suspicions of her disobedient departure that began with an empty bed. He brought the beverage to the table, where 2 cups awaited use. I should have foreseen this stunt, Regret admitted, pouring juice into the middle-aged man's glass. But despite her qualifications to conquer Golar, elemental of Earth, I couldn't rightfully permit her to challenge him. James served himself, then sat with wrenching worry blatantly plastered all over his wrinkled face. If she's qualified, why lie about it? Sipping the refreshing beverage mildly disturbed the strong man's expression. He generally disliked fruit, but was too thirsty to turn down hydration of any kind, and James had nothing else to offer on such short notice. They'd recently depleted the last of their milk, and remaining water stores weren't for drinking. Both were scheduled to be restocked today. Knowing how she gets, the repercussions of honesty could have been far worse. Victory would encourage cockiness, and she'd rush recklessly after the next elemental before she's ready. He sighed. I just pray that in her rash behavior, she held on to enough sensibility to embark to Golar's domain. Almost afraid to ask, the guest inquired. And if she went to another? Discomfort about responding hesitated. Merely considering the possibility weighed on James's heart with remorse. Not wanting to leave his friend in unnecessary suspense, the honest answer forced itself out with clear enunciation. To put it bluntly, she'll die. Towering 30 feet tall with most his body still underground, the spectacular worm seemed like an extension of his volcanic territory. His piercing green eyes hungry and intrigued, both evinced by his toothy smile of razor-sharp, obsidian fangs stretching cheek to cheek. Every breath exhaled heat waves into arid air, amplifying refraction from the cave's own scorching temperature. Resolve alone restrained the terrified Kylene from a fearful retreat, forcing her to stand unwavering, determined to undertake the ultimate trial against the monstrous beast, an endeavoring spirit unable to mask her true fear from the observant elemental. Displaying such fright was quite peculiar. That degree of terror was rare in one's heart after visiting his brother Golar. That meeting, which conventionally always came first, usually hardened wizards, desensitizing them to fearful emotions triggered by the daunting sight of an elemental. Kylene conjured a magic orb in her right hand, which she nervously squeezed as it grew. By my understanding, she yelled, speaking loudly to relieve stress, you and I must do battle to test my worthiness. The sphere's diameter expanded to 4 inches, then started pulsating as its power continued swelling, causing an electrical-like current to slither all along its surface. A glimmer in Hitza's judgmental eyes expressed confirmation by a firm readiness to receive Kylene's initiative. In that case, allow me to get the ball, spell hurled, rolling! The attack scored a direct hit to Hitza's reptilian face, exploding in a brilliant flash that's wake left a thin, hanging cloud of scintillant vapor. Quickly, Kylene began prepping another, but the Chimera's mug as that first spell's residual fog faded petrified her in disbelief that fizzled what little energy she had gathered. Nearly maximizing the destructive output she could rationally muster into a single spell, Kylene had essentially hit him with full force, yet there he smirked without a scratch. The attack had zero effect. Kylene stepped back in shock, and for balance as Hitsa's arrogance laughed. His amused vocals trembled the entire cavern. "Did I neglect to mention?" he asked provocatively. "Raw human spirit is utterly inefficacious. The augmentation of another elemental is required to damage my tempered hide." Powerlessness expressed so bluntly by both word and example flabbergasted Kylene, yet simultaneously emboldened her determination. She came to self-evident readiness to advance on her personal schedule, plus to show James the error of his retracted promise. Combined with those motivations, Hitsa's proclamation of invincibility was all the more motivation to triumph. "Is that so?" Kylene drew her twin daggers from the leather shoulder sheaths on her poncho and channeled magic into their blades. "Well then, how about this?" She swung one, then the other, flinging magical crescents to deliver precise slices between the behemoth's stone scales. The spells broke like glass against his agglomerate hide, their shards dissipating into nothingness on the wind. Upgraded efficacy amounted to a harmless tingle not worth humoring by shrugging off. "Clever trick, I'll admit, but such feeble creativity is meaningless." Hitsa's jaws gaped. Fangs, tongue, palate, throat, all seeped flaming tendrils that weaved into a fireball. A swirling blaze which enlarged until nearly gagging the enormous maw, then discharged with imperceptible recoil like a cannonball. While that spherical inferno was amassing, preemptive measures encased Kylene inside a translucent dome of protective magic emanated outward from herself, then anchored via countless microscopic threads for sustainability and reinforcement. The fireball exploded on impact, unleashing an inferno encompassing several yards, pressuring Kylene's barrier with incredible might that critically caressed the very edge of its durability. Wispy, flaming tongues slipped through numerous cracks, fading when separated from the main blaze by arduous mending. Looming outside the ravaging blaze, Hitsa observed the sorceress' perseverance. Such a feeble creature, this Kylene star. He could kill her easy if doing so didn't contradict his purpose. Duty to properly test her superseded any temptations to simply pull the pitiful display's plug. Even as he watched, he was actively regulating his firepower to not obliterate her barrier and char Kylene outright. Grueling strain to maintain her overexerted shield dropped Kylene onto one knee, with every other muscle feeling ready to fatally imitate. Fluttering eyelids urged rest, weighing down over blurring vision. Only by death's guarantee should the protective dome fail did desperation endow fortitude to resist, unaware of her assailant's own intervention. 20 back-breaking seconds, and the raging fire finally subsided. Kylene's thrashed barrier shattered into a million fragments, cascading over herself and the ground while dissipating into the superheated air. Glittering particles sprinkling softly onto her skin minimally restored fagged vitality, familiarity with the signature of her aura automatically reabsorbing them back into the whole. "Impudent whelp," scoffed an unimpressed Hitsa. It had been ages since last he looked down upon an equally pathetic opponent. Even the weakest who dared come averaged twice that long before falling to their knees. "If you expected such pitiful strength to claim victory, your impotence is rivaled only by your foolishness." Gritting her teeth, Kylene rose. Anger insisted on conjuring another bullet, refrained by her last attack's hindsight. Her only hope for victory, survival, lay in conservative tactics, while praying that a decisive opportunity may miraculously reveal itself. Passionate pertinacity stared against Hitsa's judgmental inspection into Kylene's soul. Seeing that doggedness standing defiant of hopelessness produced a mildly amused grin on the monster's lips, which lasted only one sentence before turning upside down. "You're determined, I'll grant you that. Unfortunately for your bullheaded beliefs, resolve alone doesn't suffice. Might, willpower, intelligence. These three fundamentals forge the indispensable keys to unlocking success. Be it by magic, weapon, or one's own body. It is by might that a foe may be brought down. Unless one's strength possesses the capacity to inflict decisive injuries, inevitable failure can only be postponed. No amount of determination fueling one's spirit can overcome an adversary shielded by impregnable defenses. It is by willpower that animals act and refrain from yielding to overwhelming adversity. Absolute strength and wisdom are wasted on the battlefield if the conviction to fight wavers, a truth which reigns supreme when two battlers share similar physical and mental aptitude, making the outcome all the more dependent on whosoever yields. It is by intelligence that one assesses solutions to imperative problems and gains an understanding of oneself. Mindless though they may appear, battles brim with vital decisions, the wrong of which can cost one's life. Every maneuver, exploit, and attack boils down to the brain's ability to make smart decisions and calculate the application of one's own capabilities into their execution. The moment one's mind falters, combat efforts are rendered ineffectual, sometimes even self-destructive. Without all three, one may feasibly conquer only foes who themselves are equally incompetent. You have admirably shown unrelenting willpower and acceptable tactics. However, your offensive prowess demonstrated thus far cannot win this fight. It's impossible, even if we fought incessantly for 100 days. Hypothetically, if by then we still stood, my scales would yet be scratched. So unless you've unimaginably been holding back, your fate is indisputable. Heatza's reptilian tongue, comprised of flesh-like lava, mockingly licked his stone lips. The truthfulness of Heatza's lecture, amplified by reminiscence of a similar one spouted last night, enraged Kylene. Furrowing fury bestially snarled at the indomitable monster, returning his intimidating glare with her sharp own. Pressure grasping her weapons seemed plentiful to crack their hilts. Boiling blood sparked a second wind. The wizard felt ready to fight as she couldn't without first discerning some vulnerability in the Chimera's iron defense. Alongside clearly listening to Heatza's declaration of guaranteed victory, Kylene analytically racked for a solution to her deadly predicament. Her irritated eyes suddenly widening when witnessing that disgustingly taunting anticipation of hunger, but neither shock nor fear took credit for those eyelids spread open by epiphany. "That's it!" Kylene's demeanor abruptly changed. Anger subsided, uncertainty melted away. Standing tall and collected, she extended her right arm forward, pointing its dagger precisely between the worm's eyes. "Oh?" The fire elemental had quite the familiarity with that human gesticulation. Many challengers posed similarly when envisioning a path to victory. Although countless overconfident souls who issued that premature proclamation failed miserably, it never ceased to intrigue. What endowed the gall for such audacity, he always wondered, especially during obviously one-sided bouts. When Kylene didn't flinch from Heatza's fearlessness, he leaned forward, grinning with true fascination. "Very well. Show me. Demonstrate your mettle, and when you're finished, I shall revel over your subjugation to how absolutely powerless you really are." He said that, but deep down hoped the woman would miraculously prove him wrong, due to a rarely publicized personality quirk shared by all elementals, the inherent desire to see challengers succeed. That quirk forever motivated their intrinsic mission, regardless of how their ridiculously high standards and insatiable assurance suggested otherwise. Kylene's stare hardened. "Beware who you call powerless. That arrogance will give rise to shame once our pact is established." Mockery was merely a stall tactic. Discovering Heatza's vulnerability was the first step, but cognitive processes were still plotting its exploitation. "A pact, you say?" Heatza reared his head. "If you're truly worthy," a ramming headbutt lunged with tremendous force, "then prove it!" Kylene dove leftward, narrowly avoiding being grazed by that massive charge. Heatza didn't pull back, his collision with the ground fusing himself into the earth like when he first emerged, causing zero damage to either while submerging. A reaction Kylene prayed would happen, lest she be showered by volcanic debris. Adroitness rolled into a one-legged kneel, linking swiftly into an about face in time to witness Heatza disappear completely. Observant orange eyes scanned for signs of activity as she stood up and identified safe nearby coordinates. Alert ears vigilantly sought the elemental's whereabouts and from whence he would strike next. Magic stimulated vibrise, extending her radial awareness, every muscle at the ready in an encompassing guard governed by patient concentration. All a practice in futility, for Hitza had shed detectability by totally merging with the cave, uniting body and domain into a singular entity, his consciousness technically residing down below. From every simultaneous angle, he watched Kylene a couple minutes to ponder while testing her patience. Compared to the rest of her poor performance, remaining focused and ready for the whole duration certainly impressed him. Akin to a seasoned hunter, Hitza watched closely for the perfect opportunity to strike, a wide-open exposure to attack with speed and precision. Calculations arranged the blow to be non-fatal in the absence of any unforeseen mishap, like a poor action on Kylene's behalf causing more harm than good. A considerable shift in her rightward focus presented that chance. A blunt stone pole suddenly jutted from a stalagmite, stretching towards the back of Kylene's head at a bludgeoning speed, emitting zero noise except the faint slicing of air. Hitza's current form lacking a mouth did not stop him from mentally smirking as his attack zoomed along that optical blind spot, only to be struck marveling in spite of himself. Back still facing the oncoming attack, Kylene quickly ducked at the last second, followed swiftly by the loud clang of an ineffectual overhead counterattack. Impact nearly tore the dagger from her right hand, rattling her arm with stinging vibrations. She shook it off while hurrying out from underneath the rod, which had meanwhile penetrated a wall. On her feet, Spite delivered another useless slash with her right blade for good measure before retreat distanced from the stilled rock. Hitza was perplexed. He'd never seen such a remarkable feat. Most wizards would use earth magic to feel or disrupt changes in the terrain, or if lucky might happen to peripherally spot the hurling protrusion just in time to block or dodge. Kylene did neither, from what he could tell. Needing answers, the fire elemental focused his magic-sensitive eyes to notice the strange woman's whiskers emitting humanly invisible pulses. "Is that it?" The chimera mimicked his last attack and closely observed. Barreling stone agitated the magical radar waves, twitching whiskers which tattled to Kylene's lightning reflexes when and how to flawlessly evade. She counterattacked by blasting a weak magic bullet from her fist in combination with a leap to gain some distance. Caution avoided returning near the first horizontal bar. Intriguing! By using those peculiar facial hairs as focal points, she can accurately sense her surroundings by releasing subtle magic pulsations. Throughout the centuries, never have I witnessed a similar technique harnessed so acutely. Kylene remained centered, resisting the irritation that was setting in. Her evasiveness versus his durability landed them smack dab in a stalemate. She hoped he would soon agree and alter his tactics to somehow improve offense while inadvertently compromising defense. Adjust tactics he did indeed, though not in his aspirant opponent's favor. Another extension outstretched from a vertical surface, emerging in plain sight and sporting a reptilian claw clutching a fireball the size of a baseball. Accurately predicting intent to throw the blazing sphere should she evade, Kylene hastily detonated it from a safe distance with her own projectile, then sidestepped the incoming pole that tip had sharpened into spikes. "Enough of these games!" Kylene shouted, echoing into the emptiness of the bubbling cavern. "Come out and fight, or are you too afraid I'll make good on defeating you?" "I am fighting," Hitza replied, his omnipresent voice reverberating indistinguishably throughout the whole cave. "Your inability to retaliate doesn't classify my actions as otherwise. Rather, resorting to juvenile accusations to justify your own weakness only proves you are much too inexperienced and immature of a whelp to be here. The likes of you may better serve humanity as an offering of fuel for those truly worthy, not to have that power wasted in your feckless hands." "I'll show you who's on the menu." Kylene sheathed her daggers and grasped the shaft of rock nearest to her. "By cracking your hide like an eggshell." Plethoric energy gushed from her mana heart and from all throughout her soma to accumulate into her palms, illuminating hands with brilliantly swelling quantities of magic not yet trained to safely use. Depending on spell complexity and a person's experience, the time to cast a complete magic spell usually ranged 1 to 5 seconds. Fury empowered her pause for an unprecedented triplication of that standard, pushing Kylene dangerously beyond rational limitations, aggressively exceeding her capacity by a measurable degree until hazardously teetering on dangerously hazy concentration. A single misstep during such an overexerting spell would be catastrophic. The magic could backfire and obliterate her hands as critically unstable magic internally explodes. Yelping volume paled compared to the blaring bang that induced the vulpecular shriek when the explosive detonated. Devastating force fiercely cold-cocked her. The arduous stress its overpowered nature put on her ill-prepared spirit afflicted veritable paralysis for several seconds. Recovering numbness was quickly replaced with the cripplingly nauseous enfeeblement of exerting oneself well beyond physical and mental limits. A sickening sensation so encompassing, even bleary arms and legs felt on the verge of retching. Every internal part of her body was deprived of the ethereal essence responsible for providing them vitality, leaving them enduring a manner of starvation until magic began to flow again from a tapped core. When Kylene managed to rise to her feet with the settling of that horrible affliction, her attention went straight to where she had blasted the pole, hitting her retinas with a disheartening reality that stirred up nauseousness anew with forlorn dread. What she hoped would have totally shattered the stone merely cracked its surface, causing little more harm than tiny traces of dripping lava akin to blood oozing from an abrasive rug burn. All 3 extensions retracted after teasingly granting Kylene a mo to observe her futility. "Admittedly, I'm pleasantly surprised." As he spoke, Heat's vision, which looked at Kylene from all directions, collapsed in on itself like a focalizing kaleidoscope, where it converged at his central consciousness below the woman. "I honestly doubted you possessed ample power to inflict even that minor of damage. Regretfully, however, the time and effort required to gather the necessary energy renders its application useless. Had I not let it happen, you never would have finished your spell." Slowly he closed in like an expert predator stalking oblivious prey. "I have evaluated enough." His voice wasn't indicative of the shrinking gap between himself and her. "Continued testing would only serve to diminish your nutritional value, so goodbye." Without further warning, tripping sensitive awareness, enormous jaws suddenly protruded from the ground, flanking Kylene's front and rear. Her horrified heart practically burst from her chest. Time barely allowed grabbing her daggers before a ravenous chomp enclosed the sorceress inside the dark, warm prison of the stone worm's mouth like a measly morsel. "Is it really that grim?" The grave response didn't cause James's guest to outwardly react, but terrified concern tormented the stoic man with despair from hearing his greatest fear articulated. James rested elbows on the table, cradling his bearded chin upon interlocked digits. A brooding gaze met the wooden furniture's unfinished surface. "I suppose there's an astronomically slim probability she may survive Heat's trial, but we're talking optimistic odds of below 1%. However, if freshness led her to Aquolf, elemental of water, or Wing, wind, we might as well save ourselves the trouble of waiting in dear hope and begin preparations for an untimely funeral." The guest repressed slamming his mighty fists onto the table. His Herculean brawn could damage or break the primitively constructed furniture. "Well then why the hell aren't we stopping her?" "Settle down." James met and matched the worry of doing nothing gleaming in the larger man's hazel eyes. "I too wish to act, but we must not allow emotions to blind our judgment. We can't do anything until we know where she went, and even then it may be too late. Besides..." He stared off blankly, too deeply contemplating and fighting his own concern to maintain eye contact. "If her destination is the Cave of Fire, we may be better off running the risk." Furious disbelief urged the guest to defiantly question that absurd recommendation, but ceased as the enraged words pressed against his lips. He pulled back a moment to clear his head and try to grok his old friend's logic that concern didn't want to acknowledge. Thinking on it, he sighed, his tension slightly eased. "Because if we interfere, we'll only worsen matters." The elderly wizard solemnly nodded. I guarantee the main contributing factor to her departure is rebellion against my order to wait. She also knows that Golar is the first elemental a wizard must meet. If she went to another, it means Forbiddance drove her to prove something. Therefore, if she did head north, and we were to stop her, no doubt she would sneak out again at the first opportunity and head to the Cave of Water or Wind out of spite. James began adding why they must intervene if Kylene set her sights east or west, as those destinations were surefire death sentences, but he was interrupted by the familiar, far-off call of his guest's companion. Both men directed their full attention outside, staring and listening out into the dawning light. Can you make out what she's saying? James' friend nodded, practically jumping from his seat in antsy fear. Kylene headed north, he answered with a horrified tone. No question. To hell with the plan! We have to stop her! Intent that flooded both their souls as their hearts were coated with anxious panic. That time, though, as James too bolted from his seat, it was the guest who spoke in heartbreaking logic's defense. Sadly, he heavily suspired, his riled muscles slackening with defeat. If Kylene took this long to track, then we're already too late. Only my wife can catch up to her now, but she lacks the power and influence to alter what's already been set into motion. Hating himself for it, James sorrowfully agreed. Then all we can do now. Devastation gazed out at the summery alpenglow through the north-facing window above his bed, the moisture in his green eyes forlornly reflecting the morning's beautiful radiance. Is pray. Thus concludes Chapter 4.